Yes. Did you send me your weekly documentation form and I missed it?
Yeah. I shared it with you yesterday, I believe.
Okay.
And I recently shared. I tried my best to do that cultural genogram. Don't judge me, okay?
I'm not judging. And I did.
And I didn't do my biofamily just because I didn't want to get into the headache and the heartache that comes with that. So, and I don't know a whole lot.
That is okay. And I look forward to talking about it more next week. So there is no judgment with any activity that we do. They're more for you than they are for me necessarily. So it's not like I'm grading it like a professor. So it's just to talk through, and it's to make sure every supervisee knows, things to watch for as they're counseling. A big part of supervision, and I can't remember how much we may have talked about it with you being newer, is that there's really 3 different roles that I look at that I'm in when we do supervision. And so one of those is a teacher, and one of those is the counselor, and one is the consultant. And so the teacher one is the one we've been in the most, because that's like answering questions. It's making sure you're on the right path, like as you were switching your sites, and making sure you have all the paperwork you need, and that we've gone through activities, we've done all those types of things. Eventually, and we'll do it at different points in time, but the next one would be the counselor one, and that's when you're evaluating yourself and like your own experiences and how those might be impacting your work with clients. And then the last one is hopefully by the end of supervision, we get to a point of more of that consultant phase. And that means we're, a lot of times we're on the same level in how we're viewing things. It doesn't mean we have the same perspective, but it means we're just bouncing ideas off each other, and you have the independence. You're not feeling as dependent on me to need to get questions answered, and you know where to go and what to do. And then we just talk through, all the options for that. So it's very fluid. It's not like you move from one phase into the next phase. It's like the grief cycle. You can kind of bounce back and forth based on what you're working on, the site you're at, and what you're needing. And it's okay for all of those. But this is really to set you up for that phase, and as you need help as you're working with clients and thinking things I'm struggling with now or have in the past, how is that impacting my work with this person? So that's really the goal.
As I was thinking yesterday about supervision today, you always put pre-session goals. I was like, I can't think of any. So I couldn't think of any. I mean, it's always, I don't know, I couldn't think of any at that moment. Mm-hmm. So I left that part blank.
Okay.
And when you say pre-session goals, it's just that, right?
Yes. It just means like, what are the things that you want to make sure we talk about today? So it could be related to clients and things you're experiencing right now. It could be that it would be good for you to brainstorm out, like, what are all the questions I have about being in the field? Or what are some topics that I want to know more about? So
okay, that's what I thought.
Yes.
That's everything. Can we just say everything? Does that work?
That's great, but I won't know what to talk about if you say So unfortunately, with my personality, you'll have to be a little more specific, or I won't know what to go off of. But I will always try.
I also put this as things that what is this? Homework I was given and have completed, and research I have read or looked into to help my clients. Suicidal ideation and bipolar 2. That's like all of my clients. So I don't know if we touched on this last week, but that's something I've been trying to research and still try to get a handle on, because every time I have someone say, yeah, I've tried to commit suicide by swallowing 200 pills and all this other kind of stuff, I'm like, straight face, don't let your eyes water. What can you say in this moment? Are you supposed to say something in this moment? Will it be the right thing to say in this moment when they disclose that?
Like where they're at. Well, and what you're hitting on is still that piece of like needing to gain the confidence, because I'm hearing some of those same things about the fear of like, is what I'm going to be enough, of what they need. Yeah. It's good that you're definitely thinking that way, because you want to make sure that you're meeting the needs of who you're with and you're aware of that. Just don't let yourself get in the way, of going ahead and moving forward with an answer. How would you know if the answer you gave wasn't enough?
I mean, I'm sure their reaction, whether it's a nonverbal or verbal reaction, could be a clear indicator of that's not what I needed, or that's exactly what I needed to hear.
I think
or they might just be indifferent and they just need that, and that's okay too.
And how are you going to know if the answer you've given is what they needed to hear?
I might not know ever. They might be like, it was great, but they might not disclose that with me, or they might be like, you get it, you understand, or I might not get nothing. And that might be more of the case than not.
You're exactly right. And by being able to answer all of that, Mary, you have a lot more insight than you think you do, just because you know what the options are. So remember, I can answer this question, but I want to make sure that we've talked about, again, that everything we do is really built on that relationship with the client. It's not so much the exact right words that we use, because everyone may give a different response to that. I guarantee if you even put 2 or 10 or 20 counselors in the room, they all might have given a different response, to that type of statement. And it can still be positive responses and, quote, the right, response, because it's not a right or a wrong. So keep that in mind. There are, I talked in that email yesterday that I shared so many things with you all, on the Google Drive. And it does have I want to remember, I think it was in those initial activities that we're still working through where it had some of those documents. It does have some evaluations that aren't quite as formal, but they're good as you're getting started in the field to recognize how much of me might be getting in the way, of what I'm doing. So those are in there, and you could easily, it's under resources, if I'm remembering right. It had the initial activities, and then it has some resources in there. And those could be good. There's like one, it only takes a few minutes to fill out. It's not going to be, life or death to get it done, and it won't consume all your time. So it would be pretty easy. So to answer the other side of the question, what have you looked into before or recently? What is helping, at this point with the bipolar, clients or the suicidal clients? Like what previous...
Just really learning, I guess, best practices, which there really aren't any, I feel like solid best practices. Like you say, it really just depends on the relationship. And making sure that's, a strong relationship and therapeutic. I remember I had one patient tell me last week, she was like, the therapist I had an inpatient, I didn't like her because I feel like I could see her pulling the words out of the book to tell me it wasn't genuine. And I was like, that resonated with me to hear a patient say that. That's not what I need. I need you to be a human being. Yes, you have these credentials, yes, you have this degree, but you being human is what's important to me right now. And I'm starting to see that has a lot of fact. That's kind of true. But being comfortable and knowing that I don't have to grab the words out of the book, I don't have to use the correct terminology, I don't have to do that. It's a little nerve-wracking.
Yes. Well, and you're still very new, in your journey. You're just, a few months into being licensed, and we've just been together for the weeks, that we've been together and been meeting as we've gone along. So it is, a learning process where you'll continue to figure that out. But I think that is really neat and encouraging how, the very thing that you're struggling with is exactly what a patient ended up telling you. And so you have to keep that in mind when you're with them, is that, for you, yes, we want to build that relationship, but ultimately, kind of our prayer and our hope is that we're not always having to come up with the words ourselves, just like you had someone across your path, that reassured you of what the true meaning of counseling is and what the foundation of it is and what's behind it. Is the same thing of trusting God's going to give you those words, in that moment. And if you say the wrong thing, guess what? You're going to be able to see a reaction, or you're going to know afterwards. And the goal is to use it as a learning curve and something to grow from. So there's a video that we've watched at different points in times. I think I saw it originally through church, but it's the lady who started Spanx, of all things, which is kind of crazy. But what her dad would do is every day, while she was growing up, what the family did is they would go around the table, and the goal was to talk about your biggest failure that day. So it wasn't what is something that went good or what was your favorite thing. It was what was your biggest failure today? And you kind of celebrated that because it gave you something to learn from. And so instead of trying to get it right, or make sure that you're, not making too many mistakes, kind of this pleaser part. I think you've got to turn it more into, I'm doing the best that I know how with the knowledge that I have, but I'm going to make it a point to learn from every mistake, that I feel like I make, whether it's with a client or whether it's not. And we've got to trust that process, that even if we make, quote, mistake, or we regret what we said, or we regret the direction that we went in a session, that, it's not going to make or break life, for someone. The hope is, that it's one step towards something they needed to hear, and that you can continue moving forward, from there. So it's all a learning curve, and we can always come back. For clients, a lot of them struggle with relationships and forgiveness and holding on to things. So it can be, sometimes it's good if we make a mistake, because we can come back to them and say, you know what, I'm realizing the direction I went or the thing I said, it may not have been exactly what you needed to hear right then.
Okay.
And I just wanted to ask forgiveness for that, and clear that up with you and make sure that we're okay, as we continue moving forward as a counselor and client. And that is you showing some vulnerability. Some people would really be against that. And some people, will watch me doing this and be against that. But for me, you've got to model and set the example and not just talk it.
You have to be willing to be vulnerable if you want them to be vulnerable, right? To a certain extent. Correct?
Right.
But yeah, it only makes sense.
So one of, the best, situations I think I've been in, in doing the EMDR, and with that being something that's still new to me, is that, a client that I've had who has experienced lots and lots of trauma, the worst I've seen in my career, is, I had to really be honest and vulnerable with her and saying, look, this is totally new to me. I have no clue how well it's going to work or not going to work. But, if you're willing to be my guinea pig, kind of thing, then we'll head down this path. And the change in the relationship was very evident. Not that it became unprofessional or inappropriate, but it's probably been very rare that anyone has been that vulnerable with her, as vulnerable as she feels when she is with people, because she knows how much people can hurt you. And so I really feel like it gave us some steps forward, and so there are times, even with the MDR, that I felt like I did the right thing, and then I wasn't sure, and then I headed this way, and then I, headed that way, and I've had to clear it up, and just say, look, here's the deal. I need to ask forgiveness for this, because, and I felt like this might be the best next step, but I'm not sure, that it is. Can we clear that up? And, do you still want to move forward with me? And, whatever it is. So it definitely gives them an opportunity. So I'm not saying with every client that that's appropriate. I'm not saying in every situation, because we just can't give always and ever, type things. But setting that example could be huge, So even look at anytime you really feel like you have messed up, maybe it's an opportunity. It's either an opportunity for you to learn and grow from, or for the client.
Gotcha. It was funny, one of the patients last week, because we had combined group, because our census are kind of low right now. I have like 2 people, and the other therapist has like 3.
Oh,
so
wow.
We were combining, and one of the guys was like, so I heard this, is this true? He was like, do therapists go see other therapists? And the other therapist was like, yeah, we have to keep our sanity.
That's
and I appreciate her being so honest, because it's true, because I think that we're not human, that we do this for a living, and it's just all roses, and it's not that at all. That we also have the things that we struggle with.
Yeah. Well, and exactly with, like you're saying, with the patients that you're working with, and when they're in such a critical state, it is really good for them to have reminders, like, it's not that something is wrong with them, or that they need to be in a separate category than everyone else, that it's a matter of, it's something we all have to stay on top of, or any of us, could end up in a situation of needing more intensive care. So that could be a good reminder, because it makes you human to them.
Yeah, and you normalize it, like, just because you're in here doesn't necessarily mean that this is abnormal. Like, there's a lot of people that you might view as successful or X, Y, and Z that have the same struggles.
Exactly. So definitely. So you're on a good path, I would say, with that. Does that help give just enough of a foundation and understanding kind of still how the process works?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
As for information, what things have you read or been trained into this point, or I'll just leave it at that.
Well, Google has been my best friend.
Okay.
So I was just looking up like articles on like suicidal ideation and like bipolar 2 and the diagnosis and how to like,
Mm-hmm.
help with like their manic episodes and things like that. Just random research.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, well, I don't really know how to do any of these things. I don't really know how to do EMDR. Like that's been coming up a lot for like bipolar.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, well, I'm not trained in that, so I can't really use that tool.
Right. No, that makes sense. And really, the setting you're in is not even set up or designed for that. It's not meant for group.
That's another frustrating thing. It's not designed for a lot of things that would be very effective.
Right.
But I have no control over that.
Sure. And there are a bunch of the resourcing. A part of EMDR is called resourcing, and that's just the front end of it, which could last for a long time or last for a couple of sessions or however long. But it's where you're using some of the breathing techniques and what they call safe, calm place, some imagery, and some different things like that. You don't have to be trained in EMDR to use those, and those are all the things that you can implement. So one thing that you could do, I'm trying to think through in my head, there's the EMDR information that is on the Google Drive, that I shared with you where it has all the different topics. So it would be on that teen adult one, and it will say EMDR. So don't hesitate because you're thinking, well, I'm not trained in EMDR, I can't do that.
So look in there. Okay.
Yeah, it's actually a whole training that includes a whole bunch of resourcing, different like protocols that you can do and you could be using in your groups. So it's like
cool.
mindfulness / imagery / resourcing. They're just helpful. So that would be one thing that I would look into. Another thing I would say is, did you already know about, I want to say, and I may quote it wrong at this point, but isn't the website called Therapist Aid?
Yes, I have used that to pull off some like handouts and help with psychoeducation.
Okay, perfect. I was going to say, have you gotten some psychoeducation things, or have you found some curriculum on there? Okay, that would be helpful. And I say curriculum very loosely, not as in a formal curriculum.
Right.
Okay, so I wanted to make sure you knew about that. On the things that I just shared this week under, I think it was like CCFAM training, so it's trainings that other people in the office have done that were not mine. There was a whole training on suicide prevention and just on suicide in general. So it would probably have some information in there that you could use as psychoeducation, plus it had all of the resources that are available in our county.
Oh, yay.
So even as they're kind of discharging or, while they're there, if you want them to go ahead and look into some of those other resources they might have, that could give some good steps, for them to take next steps. So there is that one. For bipolar, I'm trying to think specifically, those folders that are shared on that drive are more by issue, as in like issue or symptom, less by diagnosis.
Yeah.
And so if it was, like anger, then there's the anger folder and you could look at handouts, in that one. If it was more, trying to think of what else, just the anxiety, depression side, there are, some folders that would apply more for that. So whatever their main symptom or struggle is, which a majority of the time, it doesn't matter who it is, relationships is a big piece of that, along with just the symptoms. Just look in those, folders and make sure that you've looked through that information. I'm trying to think of something specific right now, but I think those are even slipping my mind. What other things would be helpful to get information? And I think we have more on the suicide side than I can think of. What is the biggest struggle with the bipolar clients? Like, what are you Googling for? What are you trying to
Just
get?
like when they go into like those manic episodes, kind of like get them like grounded in that moment, like shift that. What did she describe it as? One of my patients. She was like, shift my mind attacking itself is what she told me.
Okay.
So I was like, I don't really know how to help with that. Let me figure that out.
Right.
Let me figure that out for you.
So shift my mind attacking itself. And tell me what she means by that, just because I want to make sure I understand.
Like,
What do you
I
think?
have no control. Like, I can't stop. Like, why do I feel like this? Like, I can't stop. I just want to make it stop. I just want to calm down. I just want to be rational. I just want to be normal. But I can't, because my mind keeps attacking itself. I'm like, okay.
Which almost has like that panic with it, or kind of the paranoia of not paranoia, but the panic of I'm never going to be able to stop, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay, so what would you tell someone, what have you learned in the past or in the present or whenever, what would you tell someone who is having a panic attack in front of you?
I would definitely probably focus on like breathing, bringing it back to the present, the here and now, and maybe some grounding techniques.
Okay.
What can I see? What can I hear? What can I touch? Like that kind of intervention per se to kind of bring them back.
Right. And trying to get them focused, like you're saying, on something in the present versus like that distraction. So what we just talked about with EMDR and the resources that are in, that training that we did, and what's included in that handout, those are all grounding as well.
Okay.
As in, like, you could use any of those to bring them back to the here and now. The grounding piece can also be, it can be like, let's close our eyes, describe for me things that are in this office. Like, picture them in your head, and describe them. I think that, the imagery piece is extremely powerful. And so that's why either using, what you can, like you're saying, hear, see, touch, feel, whatever that might be. You could use that side. You could use the imagery, like just in the office, or in the room, like wherever you're at, of, describe for me like the chairs on the leg, or describe, the color of the carpet, like whatever it might be. It's like a distraction, that gets them focused on something in the room versus I'm trying to distract myself, with something outside of what's right here, and that doesn't really work. So everybody is different, and there are other things with grounding you could do. I'm sure you've Googled that as well, I'm going to guess. Okay.
Google is my friend.
What did you find when you were Googling grounding?
Well, the main thing that coming up with the grounding is the 5 senses. Like, I guess that seems to be one of the most effective ones. And then I know when I was at the Advocacy Center, they told me when you have them count back from like 100 by like 4s or like 7, because it takes them time to focus and to think, 193, subtract 7 from that, that's going to give me. So, but the 5 senses seems to be the one that's like, this is going to be the most effective.
Well, and it is going to be. And the reason the EMDR resourcing pieces will be so helpful is because EMDR uses all of those senses. Like when you're doing the imagery, you're always including those. So they're picturing it in their head, but then they're also going further into the senses as well. So that's why don't feel like, well, I'm not trained in that, so I can't use anything with it. All that it means is you're just not using like the equipment or the eye movement or the sets, but you can still do so many, of the things. And that's what made me realize when I was hearing about it, oh, like this is not what I thought it was, because I was already doing several of those, I was using several of those tools like in counseling as it was.
Okay.
So
I'm going to have to look in that folder then. So I was like, I'm not going to look. I don't know anything about it.
No, you're good. So the EMDR folder, and then, and that one I think is also, I think it's on the drive, but then it may also be under the CCFAM, like trainings that have been done by other people. And then in that one is also the one on the suicide, with all the resources and just psychoeducation and information.
I was kind of sad earlier this week because I had a patient and she didn't come to my group. She went over to intake because she was suicidal. She was like, I'm going to drive off the bridge. That was her plan. And so the intake had me come over there. It's like, hey, so-and-so is here. I know she's in your group. She is probably going to get admitted because of her SI. Do you want to talk to her? And I was like, sure. So I kind of convinced her just to come to group and to see how that would be like for her. And she still ended up doing it. I still had to walk over to intake, and they had to admit her. And I was just like, I felt defeated. But I knew it was important that she did get admitted, even though her SI wasn't going to go away, just meeting with me for, that amount of time. But I still felt defeated.
Okay. Why defeated? Tell me about that.
Because I'm like, I know it's not about me. Yes, I'm working on that. Trust me. But I'm like, she just stepped down to my group from inpatient, right? So I'm like, you just stepped down. You've been in my group for like a week and a half. It's not working.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I think. It's not working.
Okay.
I'm not working. That's what I thought. I'm not working.
So what percentage of it not working is about you, and what percentage of it is about her?
Exactly.
No, I'm asking. Like in your mind, when you're thinking, when you're defeated, and thinking.
Honestly, I feel like it's 50-50. Like, I have to put in the work and she has to put in the work.
Is that truly how it felt in that moment when you're feeling defeated?
It was all me in that moment. Like, I felt you for you to still have these thoughts of me to want to drive off a bridge. But then at the same time, I was like, well, you didn't. You drove here instead. Right? Because you could have done that. But you knew deep down that let me go here instead.
Mm-hmm.
So that I can be safe.
Did you tell her that?
I did.
Okay. Awesome job.
I did. And she was like, you're right. But I'm just like, I'm so tired. I'm so overwhelmed. I just can't take all the things that are going on.
Mm-hmm.
So of course we talked about that. And she was like, what do you think I should do? And I was like, well, you have to do what's best for you. I want you safe, right? And that's a priority.
Mm-hmm.
She's like, I need to go to inpatient. I was like, yes, you need to go to inpatient.
Good.
I want to feel good with you leaving, knowing that even though you laughed and you joked while we were in group, that you're still in that same headspace.
Mm-hmm. And that says a lot, even that she could make that decision for herself. So as defeating as you might feel that group wasn't enough, or I wasn't enough, or whatever we were giving, wasn't enough, it's also having to trust part of that process, of some of these people do come in the hospital, out of the hospital, in the hospital, out of the hospital,
Right.
They can be repeat offenders, so if she's going to repeat and realizes she needs to do it now, well, maybe that means that it sticks, longer than someone who would get out, come to group, and maybe they have to come back in, however much longer. Have you been able to get much information on that, just from other people working there, on how many people come back through again at some point? Is that common there or not common?
Yeah, one of those, we combined, this was like a month or so ago, one of the individuals that was in there, they had been there 13 times.
So when both of these people went back in, had they been struggling over the weekend? Because they're not coming to group on the weekend, is that right?
I think with her patient yesterday, they had a family session the day before.
Okay.
And I kind of think that's what triggered it for him, because his parents, just wasn't as supportive as they might have should have been, right?
Okay.
And then hers was on Monday, which was right after the weekend.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah.
I would say just keep tabs on it. So when I'm just exploring a little bit, are there any other fears or emotions tied into when someone is having to pull out of group?
As far as for me,
Uh-huh.
are there any other fears or emotions? I mean, I won't necessarily say, they're pulling out to do inpatient. I get it. They need that.
Mm-hmm.
But I've had people just like stop coming. I'm like, and I've called them and they haven't come back. So that's like panic mode. Like, are they still alive? And the last phone call I make is, hey, it's me from so-and-so. I'll have to do a wellness check. Do not return my phone call. And then they return my phone call.
Okay.
And then they'll be like, well, I just stopped coming because I just didn't want to come anymore. And that was that. And I'll be like, okay. So it's easier for me to know that they're stepping up than just know that they're just not coming. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
well, like, why? I had one person tell me flat out, I don't think group is effective. And I was like, okay, well, you get to decide that for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever tried to explore it further? Like, is there something we could have been doing that would have made it more effective, or?
And we did talk about that. She was like, what was her exact words? Something along the lines of not getting what she needed out of it. I think she, and I said this a long time ago about her anyway, she would benefit from like a more one-on-one.
Mm-hmm.
Because she's the type of person that will take on everybody's burden, and she's really empathetic.
Mm-hmm.
So for her to like hear those stories and then her to have her own stories, I think it just might have been too much for her.
Has a big impact on her.
Right, it was too much of a, it was doing too much of a hindrance that was doing good for her.
Mm-hmm. Did you ask what needs she could express that weren't being met so that you could point her in the right direction to get them met?
Yeah, I talked about that. She just said everything. So I was like, okay.
Okay, so she was just more vague.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Well, good. Well, I'm glad you're asking questions. You just want to make sure that you're doing
I want
that.
to know what areas can we improve. Just, like what more do you, I always say, like, what do you need from me? How can I support you in your journey?
Mm-hmm.
This is your journey, and I'm here for you. So let me know what that looks like for you.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I start off with all new members. Like, what do you need from me? How can I best help you?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I want to know that.
Right, what step to take. I think, didn't we talk about the SRS the last time, and you had talked about maybe incorporating some of that into group, like, did they have a next step to take?
The survey that they can do for areas of improvement, yes, we did talk about that.
Okay. Did you end up implementing it?
No, I did not.
Oh, no.
I'm going to put that back on my calendar.
Okay. That's okay. So, like, that's part of that weekly documentation thing, is it lets me know, like, pre-session goal-wise, what it is that you need to focus on. So if you don't have something specific, or like for today, you weren't sure what to put, but you could have said, direction for more information on bipolar, and the other one you mentioned was, I'm going blank all of a sudden. Oh, suicide. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
SI. So you could have, put that as your pre-session goal, and then on, things that I've done since the last time we talked, you write that down. So it could always be good for you, like after we've done supervision, like tag down, okay, here's my action steps of what I have to do, by the next time we're in supervision, to make sure that I'm following through. Because we can meet and we can talk, but it's just like the group that you're leading, because you're wanting to know, like, what are they implementing? We're talking about a lot of things, but there has to be that side. And I'm not saying anything negative that you didn't follow through. I'm just giving an example of it. Whatever we talked about being organized, it's all coming back now. We talked about being organized, last week, and how you could get more organized, and then that was playing into it too. So if that falls under that same bracket of like, how do I, create these to-dos that I will follow through on, or what is going to help me, take those steps, and it may be, needing to stick, something on your calendar that reminds you, oh, like I need to look into what, I was supposed to do from supervision yesterday, and you could do it within 24 hours so you don't forget. And I'm just throwing something out there, but you come up with what's going to help with that follow through, versus just, it could be really easy, I think, even for me, and that's why I'm saying it, to look at, well, the supervision session, okay, I did it, it's done, check, okay, we got credit for hours, but like what helps it go a little bit further. So
I'm on my calendar right now, actually.
Okay, so Googling can be okay, but there are some other pieces, I'm just following through on what we're talking about as well, because even though they're not specific to bipolar or SI, they still are very specific to building the relationship and then feeling like they're getting something out of group, which is all, tied into what helps with symptom reduction as well.
Mm-hmm.
So just keep that in mind. It's not always going to be trying to get more information on one specific diagnosis. If you know nothing about it, then yes, like go ahead and learn and read. But as in, is it going to give you a practical here's how to cancel a client with this? Probably not. So think about what are the ways that I can improve myself whether it's doing that awareness questionnaire that I mentioned was in the resources on those new documents that I shared, whether it's looking into, handouts or the trainings that are on the drive, whatever will get you to that next spot.
Okay.
Is, being able to follow through on that. Yes.
Question. How do you work with somebody that's been in therapy for 13 years and they are still struggling with the same things they were struggling with 13 years ago?
Okay. What does that tell you about, let me ask this several different ways. So is it okay to be in therapy 13, when is it okay to be in therapy 13 years later? Say you or I were going, and we've been going for 13 years. What makes that okay or what makes it not okay?
I feel like it's not okay. Especially with this, some people go to therapy for a year, then they don't go for another 3 years, they might have to go for 3 months, so they have a crisis. I get that, but versus a consistent kind of thing, I think at that point it's counterproductive. That's the correct term.
Okay. And how is it counterproductive?
Because we were going over CBT, we're doing cognitive distortion. She just reeled off everything I was already going to say, and I was like, okay, so you have been in therapy for a long time. For you to know this and that amount of knowledge about cognitive distortions and irrational thoughts and things of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, well, is it the therapy or is it, I don't know what to think. 13 years to me is excessive. I don't feel like 13 years continuous is necessary.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's my next question. Is when you say 13 years, do you mean they're telling you they have been going weekly for 13 years? Or are you saying they've been in therapy for 13 years? But it could be that it was once a month.
Consistent basis.
Okay.
For 13 years.
And what does consistent mean?
I don't know if it's weekly for her or she didn't really specify if she took a break and then would go back, but she said consistently for 13 years.
Okay. Well, you might want to ask some more questions. Maybe follow that up. Maybe consistent to her means, I've gone once every 3 months, for the last 13 years. So then what would our problem be? If we only had someone
not consistent enough.
Yes. So you could say 13 years, but there's not enough consistency to follow through. Okay. So what if let's pretend she was going every other week for 13 years. Then what would the problem?
I don't know. Maybe the problem is, first of all, if it's the same therapist, I feel like that's unethical. That's 13 years.
That's a really great question. I think that is the next question is, have they been seeing the same person the whole time? So there's another question, to ask. Okay, what else could you be asking?
Well, I guess her perception of therapy, what is she getting out of it? If she getting anything out of it, what is her perception of that? Is it more of I'm going to see my friend for an hour a week? You know what I mean? Is it something of that nature why she keeps, or is she really getting something out of it?
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great question. What is the benefit? Obviously you've gotten something out of going for the last 13 years. What is it that you've been able to gain or to get, or what steps have you been able to take? What have you been able to accomplish? However you want to ask that, come up with a way, to find out that information so that you know what she has gained. Because your voice when you first said it was this is ridiculous. She's made no progress whatsoever and she's going consistently for 13 years. But then we've just come up with, a whole set of questions where we don't have all the answers to know what that means. Now, if it was the same person for 13 years and it is consistent, it's every other week, okay, and you're saying, and she says, well, I go because I haven't made any improvement, okay, then what are some good questions to ask?
Oh, why are you still the same therapist if you haven't made any improvement? I mean, that's pretty straightforward and honest.
Okay.
Why do you feel this is the person you have to go to if you haven't made improvement after all this amount of time? Have you thought about trying a different therapist or something else because it's not effective?
how can you be direct and say that and take a one down if you know what a one down means? Do you know what that means when I say that, take a one down approach? Okay, so it means like I'm going to play kind of dumb is the only way I know how to describe it. It's not really being dumb, but it's just like
it's just like, oh, there aren't any ethics. I don't know anything about that. So yeah, so you've been seeing them for 13 years.
No, not dumb like that. Play whole other direction. Don't go that way. More like, I'm confused. Help me understand. I know you've been getting something out of it because you've kept going. So what is it that you have gotten out of it? So if they're like, it's a waste of time, I haven't gotten anything, they haven't, say they're not taking any responsibility. Like they haven't helped me with anything. It doesn't, I have no idea. Then you're going to go, wow, like I'm really confused. Like usually when something's not working for us, we would have stopped doing that. So help me understand, like, what is it that has had you, your motivation to keep going. So one down, I don't want to, playing dumb was probably not the right statement. It means more like you're letting them be the expert. That's what it means. So what is a way I can ask a question like, I'm confused, or I'm not sure I understand. I'm sure you understand more than I do. Help me understand. And then you're asking for them to be the expert and like guide you through it. Versus I'm the one with all the help tools and the information, and I'm the one who is the expert and I'm always in control. So it puts them, where they're having to take responsibility.
Okay, that's a good way to do it.
So I will say, that there are clients that, how can I say it? There is a client actually that I've had for that amount of time that you just mentioned. I don't have them anymore at this point, but only because I passed them on to someone else. But I saw them through a lot of life, and there were, year gaps that were in there, and I was only seeing them for many, many of those years. It was probably like once every 4 months. But the accountability that they felt like it gave them, by coming in, if I'm the only person that knows everything, about them and that they're wanting to share, was enough, they felt like, and something that was needed to keep them on track. Gotcha. So that is not like a counselor that's meeting weekly or bi-weekly, but it's enough to like stay in touch. Now, I will say with that same client that there was something, devastating that happened, just with like losing something, a material item. And so in losing that, it involved insurance having to be involved, and then having to recognize they had not been organized or followed through, on keeping up with their insurance, which then meant they didn't have it, and having to like cash pay, for this huge tangible item, that we need just in life. And so that ended up being a whole session of, I haven't really disclosed and told you about this problem that I've had long term. Now, did it fit in with things that we had worked on, and did it fit in with a lot of things, in life, and what I knew about the person? Absolutely. But had I gotten on that specific topic and said, well, have you kept up with your bills and paying, XYZ? No, because we weren't meeting often enough, for that to happen. So in that type of situation, it goes back to, when is real change occurring, or when should it really be occurring, and when are you just maintaining, what you're doing? And there's a big difference between those, because there are people that I maintained who were with me, for several years, on a maintained kind of basis. And what that might mean, in some ways, is that I'm more of the only support system that they might have, or the only person they share as much as they're sharing with.
Right.
It doesn't make it a friendship, because it still doesn't occur outside of a counseling relationship or outside of a counseling appointment. But to them, it may have some feel of it to that, because they don't have anyone else. There isn't anyone else. But I do have concerns about what you're describing, But I also want you to have a view of what the world can look like in private practice and outside of, the setting that you're in too. It doesn't, that isn't necessarily an awful thing. There is a point in time, if nothing's changing, that you do need to look at if the client is at all motivated. Like, is it you? And do I need to be referring them to someone else?
You still have the same struggles.
Yes, because ethically, am I really helping? But there's another side of a client who refuses to follow through on anything that's ever given.
Yeah.
And that is very different. Is it the same as the therapist probably should have let go of them at some point, knowing they're not motivated and there's no progress or change? Yes. But some of those can come to mind in my mind, as well, just as in same type thing of they're probably not coming in consistent enough, or probably, I'm not, because I know they're not motivated, here's the amount of time, we have gone through this process of you not being motivated. I'm not saying that to them outright and directly, but, I'm not seeing the steps that would need to be taken to continue to meet this often. Based on what I'm saying, this is what you're willing to do. This is how often we would meet, for that step. But there is, in that resources that I mentioned on the drive, I always talk about that. There is one that's like a reminder card is what it's called. It's from motivational interviewing. And it's just has like, I'm not going to be exact, so don't quote me on it, but I want to say it's like 10 questions to ask yourself, and one of those is what is the benefit or what are you gaining from still being stuck? And it's not verbatim what it says, but it's something to that degree. What are you gaining from not changing? That's the question to be asking that lady.
Yeah.
So
and she's fairly young. She's younger than me, so I'm like, that's a long amount of time for how young she is.
Right. So it could point to trauma. And needing
40s or 50s, I'll be like, okay.
Mm-hmm.
But because she's saying, I'm like, okay.
And that's where you want to know, what's the support system? Is it trauma? Does she need a different type of therapy? Is it that she's gaining something by not changing? And she doesn't want to change. So there's a client, from my past that comes to mind, who I would say it was, half medication issue of not wanting to not be on as many meds, and to be able to make more progress, as well as just I don't want to take those steps, like that requires effort from me, and it's not something that I'm willing to do. So there were times in session, you can tell the energy a client brings, because it would take everything I had just to get through a session, because it was just the energy was so low. It was hard for me to continue to stay focused, in the session. And some of that would be meds that they were taking and not getting off of, and whether pain meds or otherwise, even though they were prescribed, they was just so, so low of an energy level. And to the point of, at certain points in time, almost falling asleep, like in the session, like where I am going to fall asleep because you are almost falling asleep. Then,
right. And that's my love-hate with medication, because I had one patient, she was taking 13 medications. I'm like, how are you even functioning?
That's a lot.
What is your internal organs looking like? Like, I feel like I don't want them. Therapy is great, but if they're medicated to the point where they're not benefiting from it, then you kind of have to look at like, well, they're so medicated, but they're coming to therapy, but they're medicated. They're not even understanding or even cognizant right now.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really beneficial to have them on all these meds and then send them to therapy when you know the meds make them have low energy, drowsy, and things of that nature. But that's a whole other story.
It is. But it's a good balance between the two, because especially with bipolar clients, it's needing to keep tabs on when they're in mania. Like, are we doing it medication wise, or is it not working at all?
Mm-hmm.
Are they completely on the depression, side? And so now, is it working? Are we needing to do some more? So that was something I had to watch for, I think, pretty frequently, like in those clients as well. And in the hospital, it's hard. We talk about getting on those meds. It takes, time to see that change in about a month. But when you're doing inpatient, it's a matter of days and they're on new meds. And so that's part of doing, the kind of IOP, PHP program is being able to see it longer term and needing to figure out, do those side effects, lessen once they get used to it, or is this something that's going to continue and it's going to be, something we need to reevaluate. So they're wanting to get all that information. So yes.
And I'm always like, if you feel like your medication isn't working, like I feel like I'm a strong advocate for them in that sense. Like, I feel like it's not working. They're trying to get to the doctor. They don't want to hear me. Like I'm like, well, you have to advocate. And I would even try to talk to the nurse practitioner, like, hey, I have a patient that really kind of wants to talk to you about their medication. It's causing them to feel X, Y, and Z. Can you meet with them because they're not able to function? Mm-hmm. And sometimes they'll be like, yeah, and sometimes they'll blow it off. And I'm like, don't blow off how they are physically feeling. It's so frustrating for me. Like, you're not taking it, they are. Mm-hmm. So I feel like you need to listen to what they're going through. But that's a whole other story. I'm done.
Well, and that comes from that side of you that I know comes from, things that you've experienced as well, and really needing an advocate, for you at different points in life, and those experiences. So you're going to be very passionate about that side because you've experienced more of, or people around you, not being heard, if that makes sense. That's why having a voice is so important to you, and that comes from that realm. So those are things we can explore, further as well. But yes. Is there anything we have not touched on today that you wanted to make sure that we did touch on today?
No, it was really just like that SI and that bipolar 2 and kind of knowing how to work with that. Okay. That's really it. It's just that step up that's kind of crushed. But I feel better now.
Okay. What are the things that I've given you today that were the biggest help to you? I'll answer that one first.
Just like my part, what role did I play in that? Is that something for me to carry? Is that necessarily my fault that they stepped up? Not necessarily. Mm-hmm. Knowing that it's okay not to know the words, and just hope that God blesses you with the right things to say. And if you do make a mistake, it's okay to own up to it. Mm-hmm. Like, I never really thought about going to a client and being like, hey, you know what, that wasn't the right information. Even though I've thought about it, but I've never had the confidence and known that that was okay for me to be like, I didn't make the right call. So I want to apologize to you for that. Let's try this out. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So that's great. What steps can you take after today before we talk next week?
To be more prepared. By putting all this stuff on my calendar and making a good mental note so that I can follow through. So I can expect my clients to follow through. I don't even follow through sometimes. We have to model, right?
Yes. Were you able to get the calendar set up that you talked about last week?
Yes. So I sure did.
So
I did that.
Okay, so you didn't follow through on the SRs. That is okay, but you followed through on the calendar so you could keep up with when things were due. Perfect. Notes and discharge and all that kind of stuff. Awesome. Yeah. Okay. Well, way to go. Well, and it helps the population lessened a little bit. So now as you are getting intakes, you can start using it from the front end and see if that helps as you're trying to get more organized.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Anything else I can help with today?
Nope. I think I'm A-okay.
Okay. I'm glad to hear it. Perfect. Well, great. Well, I will talk to you next week then, and you can follow through on the steps we just talked about.
I will. I'm going to follow through.
Okay, Mary. It's good to talk to you.
You too. Have a good one.
You too. Bye.